We welcome you to another edition of Being Well Informed. My name is Claudia Barber. I am your podcast host, and we are thrilled to have on this wonderful day of our program author and professor Patricia A. Turner. Welcome to Being Well Informed. How are you today?
I'm fine today, Claudia. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Very good. We're so glad that you have chosen our talk show as one to talk about your book, Trash Talk: Anti-Obamalore and Race in the 21st Century. Tell us what got this started for you and a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I'll start with the second part. I am a recently retired but long-term professor of African American Studies, first at UC Davis, then at UCLA. Taught and done research on folklore, and in particular on um, rumors, legends, and conspiracy theories about race. And in 2004, your audience of a certain age will remember the Democratic National Convention when John Kerry was the candidate for president. I
Mhm.
was watching that, and one of the nomination speeches was coming from an up and coming Black politician from Chicago by the name of Barack Obama.
Mhm.
And he gave a searing speech, and the commentators were effusive in their praise of him. And already, he was a state senator from Illinois, and they were already putting the man in the West Wing. And I followed, I watched the audience, and then I followed the debriefing of that moment in the press for the next couple of weeks or so. And I said, this gentleman and his family are going to generate so many negative rumors, legends, and conspiracy theories, largely on the right. I'm going to start tracking them. And
Mm.
I started, and I started then, and I stopped most seriously because you have to move on. But I pretty much started in 2004 and stopped with Joe Biden's inauguration.
Wow. That's a long period.
It is. It is.
Is it 18 years?
Yeah, yeah. 2004 to 2020, 16 years. Yeah.
16 years. Okay. And you have accumulated, I guess, a war chest of uh,
I
of
love that
um,
metaphor, Claudia. Very good.
events, discussions, conversations, um, and they fall under the category of myths or what?
um, there's stories that are told and shared usually as though they are true, but lacking any standard references to evidence or
Mhm.
standard accepted evidence. Folklorists are fussy about the way we use the term myth. We don't always use it the way the general public does. So when we talk about a myth, it's a creation myth. Usually a deity is involved and so forth. So we don't use the word myth, but we use legend, we use rumor. Since most of these connect Obama with um, uh, as a partner in a larger effort to do something bad. There's usually a conspiracy element, so there are conspiracy theories.
So you have, however, compiled this book from the time period 2004. And did you actually stop right at the January 6th insurrection, or did it carry further than that?
Well, between none of us, of course, knew what was going to happen. You have to put yourself back in that moment, right? None of us knew on January 7th, right, what was going to happen in the next couple of weeks before Biden's inauguration. So
Right,
one of the most prominent one that
right,
got had a lot of currency in that January. Um, alleged that Barack Obama had conspired with the prime minister of Italy before he left office in the 2000 teens to control the satellites in the United States that had control of voting machines so that um, any votes that were for Joe Biden. So Obama would have had the ability in 2015 to know that Biden would be the candidate in 2020. This
right. Mhm.
to change votes for Trump to votes for Biden. The satellites that the Italian prime minister had control of were supposedly changing. That was the most prominent of the Obama conspiracy theories in that little window after January 6th. And there was one of the ways in which that circulated was through a YouTube video that got more than 1 million hits in about 45 minutes. And
Mm.
then, so people will say to me, "That's crazy. I never heard that. I had no idea." But if you were a part of that community that so wanted to believe that Trump had won that election, you were looking at that video and you were accepting, and Trump himself in his own proliferation of beliefs made sure that his chief lieutenants were putting that out there as one of the reasons why the election had been stolen.
I see. I see. So you also are connected to something called the Arthur Ashe Legacy Project. What is that about?
So, my last administrative and faculty position was at UCLA. Arthur Ashe graduated from UCLA in the 1960s. We're very, very proud that he is one of our many stellar Black graduates. UCLA, also Rafer Johnson, Jackie Robinson, Jackie Joyner Kersey. There's a Ralph Bunche, Nobel Peace Prize winner, eminent,
Marvelous.
we have a wonderful roster with Ash. His family and a not-for-profit that they were involved with asked us if, in perpetuity, we would be responsible for keeping his legacy alive, keeping folks informed about him, not just on the tennis courts, which is what most people associate him with. He was the first and the only Black man to have ever won Wimbledon and several other of the Grand Slam tournaments. But his work off the court, he was a tireless advocate for using tennis and sport to, by young people, to leverage their opportunities for education. He was a real believer in education in college, created many programs towards that end. So that's one of the things that we really emphasize with our project. He was key. We heard from many prominent South Africans back in November, because November was the 50th anniversary of Ash being the first Black man to play tennis in apartheid South Africa. That his visibility and that event brought their attention as South Africans to the horrors of apartheid. So that's the kind of thing that we're working on.
Now he has a legacy also that has been established in Richmond, Virginia. I know I visited the city, and I am aware that there is a lot of Arthur Ashe's legacy there.
Yes, now there is, absolutely. There's a statue. He's pretty much the only person still standing on Monument Row because they took down the
Okay.
Confederate generals around him, and he still has many family members there. There is one of the major thoroughfares in the city is Arthur Ashe Boulevard. So,
Yes.
yeah, in recent years, Virginia and Richmond have embraced them. Now, one of the things we do with our oral history project is interview people who know him. And one of our stories is from another Richmonder who knew him when he was growing up there, and another tennis player, but not someone who achieved his eminence. And he tells the story of having no idea who Arthur Ashe was because tennis was so segregated when they were teenagers. And Arthur only played in Virginia on colored only courts, as they would have been called then. And the local newspaper would not have covered. Now, at the point that our friend was telling us this story, Arthur Ashe was the number 2 ranked junior tennis player in the United States of America.
Mm.
His hometown newspaper never mentioned him, never covered his accomplishments, but they did cover tennis. They covered the man we interviewed, and they said, he had won this local tournament. And that's lovely. That's terrific that he was covered in his local paper. But they had the number 2 tennis player in the country in their city, and they never gave a bit of ink to him uh,
Mm.
at that juncture. And when Tom met him, having no idea who he was. He met him at a tournament in another state and actually said, "No, there's that we have a great quote because there's no such person as Arthur Ashe in Richmond, Virginia. I'm a tennis player there. I would know him." And then the director took him over and introduced him to, again, in the language of the day, a colored boy, and he said this was his first introduction to segregation and what it meant. And Arthur turned to him and said, "Oh, I follow your career in the newspapers, and congratulations." And he could see that Tom was really visibly uncomfortable. And he said, "If you haven't had lunch yet, why don't you join me?" And so Tom joined Arthur at the table. They had lunch out of state because they couldn't have had lunch together in their own state, uh, and and became friends for the rest of their lives.
Wow. Yeah. There's a lot of history there, and some of it ugly,
Yeah,
some of it exclusionary, but
yeah.
still history, still part of the U.S. history and legacy of Arthur Ashe. But getting back to the Obama lore book that we have discussed earlier, trash talk. And what type of trash talk is in the book? What type of conspiracy theories uh, are in the book that are unfolded?
So I sort of do it chronologically, starting with those first ones that I collected back in the 2000 sort of 4 to 2007 range. But they really fall out around themes related to identity. What are the aspects of our identity? We Our citizenship, where we're born. Probably your audience is most familiar with what are called the birther beliefs, and so I have a whole chapter on the birther beliefs. But religion is another part of our identities. And there were probably the first to emerge before the birther beliefs was the notion that he was misrepresenting himself as a Christian and he was really a Muslim. And the other aspect of a person's identity, of course, is their sexual orientation. And so there were rumors that he was misrepresenting himself as a straight, happily married man, and that in fact he was gay. That when he was in Chicago, the gay community there had a nickname for him, Bathhouse Barry, and that as he had ascended politically and needed to position himself as a straight man, he had systematically eliminated former lovers who might have the ability to out him. So, that's who we are. That's your religion, where you're born, your politics, also. That he really wasn't a Democrat; he was a socialist. He was a communist. He wanted to redistribute wealth in the United States and take from the rich and give to the poor, and usually the poor of color. After he was in office for a while, the beliefs get augmented to focus on policy and what he was actually doing in office and the kinds of decision making that he was doing. So one of the really, I think, most consequential of the beliefs about him comes in 2014, which you might remember was when there was concern about an outbreak of Ebola in
Mhm,
Western Africa and
mhm.
the
I remember.
possibility, yeah, that Ebola might come to the United States and what we ought to be doing about this outbreak. And it's so interesting. It's so interesting to look at this now that we have COVID behind us and have
Mhm,
gone through an
mhm.
international pandemic. Obviously, Ebola was before that.
Right.
And so beliefs circulated then that he had sent American soldiers to, because he, and this is absolutely true. One of the things that we did do in response to the Ebola outbreak was send American medical personnel, some military personnel, to Sierra Leone and other affected countries to help them manage the situation. And
Okay.
the rumor was that he sent American soldiers hoping that they would actually contract Ebola, hoping that they would get it. And then they would come back to the United States. And all of these soldiers, of course, would go back to their home states, all 50 states, with Ebola, and it would spread through the country. And Ebola would wipe out the white population, most of the
Mm,
population. And if that happened, it would enable Obama to fulfill his ultimate goal of bringing more Muslims into the United States, because everybody would have died from Ebola. And I mean, again, it sounds crazy, but there were enormous numbers of traffic on the websites that promoted these beliefs. And the next significant, the most significant the midterm election in 2014, is when Congress flips. It's when Congress becomes Republican House and a Republican Senate. It's
right.
when Obama cannot get his Supreme Court nominee through. And if you look at the polling data after that election, and when people were asked why they voted the way they voted, what were the issues they were concerned about, Ebola was at the top. What they had heard about Ebola was at the top of the list.
Right, right.
So and now I have people who barely remember, have just a hint of a memory of this, but it influenced, I argue in the book, it influenced that next election. And that next election was enormously consequential for everything that has happened since.
Mhm.
It starts that track with the Supreme Court, because Obama is unable to get what he needs to get Merrick Garland onto the Supreme Court, which was his slot to fill, but he couldn't do it because he had Republicans in the House and Republicans in the Senate.
I remember very well about that, stalling, that,
Yeah.
the Senate did, under the leadership of, Senator Mitch McConnell,
Yeah,
and, it's history,
yeah,
but and to the extent that they succeeded in not getting another seat on the US Supreme Court is significant as to, why we are where we are today. So
absolutely.
this, this whole concept of Obamalore and race in the 21st century, When you fast forward to, let's say, January 6th, what does your book have to say about that?
I think that race undergirded everything about that day.
Mhm,
Just think about the symbols that were being used. Think about the language. What does it mean to take back America, to make America great again? What is
mhm,
being hearkened back to? It's a time, and when people, waving Confederate flags when they hear that. Think about what they said, the insurrectionists said they wanted to do to Mike Pence. They wanted to lynch him,
mm,
right? It
mhm,
is it is the congressional police who were valiant and brave that faced those insurrectionists were largely men and women of color. They were in the Capitol. There are now in Congress elected Black officials. And I think to the insurrectionists, the presence of elected Black officials, of the Capitol Police, that in their mind, it was not criminal. In fact, in their minds, it was patriotic to
mhm.
storm that Capitol and to make it their own and put their guy in there. So all of the traffic that I saw on the far right websites, blogs, YouTube, and so forth around that time. And remember, Obama had been out of office for 4 years at that
Right.
juncture. There's all of this attention still to Obama. There's this accusation that he and his and others were running what was called and still is called a deep state. That's why his family had chosen to stay in Washington after Trump was elected, because he was really the metaphor that comes up all the time, a puppet master manipulating people in key administrative positions and agencies throughout Washington. So whenever anything that Trump wanted to accomplish in his first term didn't work, Trump and his advocates would blame the deep state. And they would
Mm,
say that the deep state was the reason they couldn't get their health care plan to override Obama, what they called Obamacare, and so forth. So I think that race was the single most significant social force underwriting what happened on January 6th. And what's really interesting, Claudia, is that if you watch the January 6th hearings, I'm trying to remember now. I think there were a total of 6 of them, and that's where we all got
mhm.
to know Lynn Cheney and, Jamie Raskin and so forth. You watch you I've done searches, I put in the word Obama and searched the transcripts, and his name is never mentioned once.
Okay.
So
So where does Michelle Obama, how does she get sort of in the mix of anything that happened on January 6th?
how does Michelle Obama, did you say?
Yes.
So Michelle is less prominent on the January 6th per se. What's lingering about Michelle really starts in the 20 teens, when the most prominent belief about her is that she's not a her, that she's a him, that she was born Michael Robinson and is transgender, and that the comedian Joan Rivers was killed for outing her. So if you go to YouTube and you put in Joan Rivers and Michelle Obama, you'll get some video. And the thing to look at is not the videos, but the comments. And in fact,
Mm,
whenever you see a story about Michelle Obama doing anything positive, look at the comments. Now, very often, all of the major outlets now disable the comments after a story about Michelle Obama. But
oh,
if they put the comments on there, look, and you will see things. They'll say Big Mike. They'll post pictures where a penis has been photoshopped into the garment that she's wearing.
mm,
All of these accusations about her, and that's usually coupled with the Bathhouse Barry ones I was talking about.
Mm. Wow, they have really, uh, really dealt with a lot of misrepresentations and conspiracy theories that just went off the
Yeah.
hook.
Hmm.
So that kind of like leaves us with a situation where, I mean, how do you do damage control in that type of scenario?
I think it's important. I think it's very hard to do damage control. A One of the things I try to draw people's attention to when I look at whatever becomes successful, wherever you can see people either changing their minds or becoming dismissive of the beliefs or saying, I'm not going to pay attention to that. One of the things I call attention to is that the many of these beliefs about Obama, and this is true of other contemporary conspiracy theories as well, there are people who have figured out how to make a living off of circulating them.
Mm,
Um, it's a profit center for people. And profit in the financial sense, but also in the political sense. So we know a lot of the Michelle law, for example, didn't originate, but its dissemination was fueled by Russian bots. The Russian political structure, particularly under Putin, has long wanted to disrupt American harmony by pitting blacks against whites, whites against blacks. So they long have a history of doing whatever they can to fuel racial discord. If you go back to the birther beliefs, and there were a handful of individuals who developed an online presence and personality around themselves as investigators who were going to come up with the truth about Barack Obama being born in Kenya, in Africa. And they solicited money from others to fuel their research trips to Hawaii and that kind of thing. And they made a living. They made a
mm.
living off of this. That was their job. They got up in the morning and they spread birther beliefs, and the more they did it, the more people hit the donate button and gave them money. So one of these individuals after 2016, when you can't make a living by telling the world Obama wasn't born in the United States, he becomes a Uber driver. He can, I mean,
Oh,
he has no means of support after
but
nobody's going
yeah,
to his
but
wedding.
that myth has been so debunked, and even
It's
when former president, it's
it's
but it's like, you know, when former President Donald Trump even insisted that he was getting close and had investigators and all that
yeah,
to
true.
underscore, you know, the untrue statement that he was not
Yeah,
born in the United States, and it was nothing to it.
yeah,
But the fact that this conspiracy arose and people were profiting off of it is pretty serious,
yeah,
pretty serious. So, you know, this is really one of those things where your book seems to have a lot to share with the public on, I guess, the conspiracy attitudes and the conspiracies out there that have not stopped since he left office, really. So
absolutely.
when was your book published?
It was published in September of 2022.
Okay, okay. So it has, I guess, a good um, um, kind of global picture of what actually the Obamas have gone through and endured on from 2004 to
Yeah,
the time that your book was published, no doubt.
yeah, absolutely.
So, Why do you suppose, though, that Michelle Obama is relevant uh, to the conspiracy theories?
I think um, the part of the reaction to Michelle Obama, which is extraordinarily hateful and unsavory, is a response to what the Obamas represented as a family. And the daughters also have been victimized by this as well. I think the notion of a black woman as first lady, as in the White House, was was unacceptable for a segment of the population, particularly someone tall, someone proud, someone who had taken advantage of um, um, an Ivy League education. So
Mhm.
the anti-Michelle lore is much more virulent whenever something positive about Michelle is in the press. So when her book came out, the anti-Michelle lore just lit up because there's
Mm,
all of this positive attention to the fact that she's got this book, that it's a bestseller, and so everyone goes now. When if we go back to her time as first lady, um, you'll remember when she had planted her garden. Um, all of this attention to healthy eating,
right.
growing your own food, and everything. Then the barometer spiked up with the materials against her. So anytime that the public embraced her, seemed to embrace something she was doing, she did
Mhm.
something that I make the case in the book that there is a segment of the population that still um, wants to say to Black people, stay where you belong. You don't belong
Mm,
here. And
mm.
they didn't think that the Obamas belonged in the White House, and that if a Black family was going to be in the White House, they ought to be cleaning it, not living in it.
Well, this week was the Iowa caucuses and their history for the year 2024. So, do you anticipate these theories will continue? Or first, I have to ask you, were the results of the Iowa caucus surprising to you?
No, they weren't, unfortunately. Um, I think um, I think that they will. I think that as long as right now, um, candidate Trump's running on his own victimization, which I think is really ironic because yeah, for multiple reasons. Because I mean, he's not a billionaire, but he claims to be a billionaire. So how on earth he's the victim of anything is hard to ponder. But he is, campaigning, raising funds off of this notion that everyone is out to get him. Many of the prominent people judges, DAs, and so forth, are people of color, and he, you know, on that front, he goes after anyone who's an enemy. So I don't want to say he has singled out, a black DA, because he goes after, he went after his own vice president. So as long as you're, if you're not in his corner, you're subject to his wrath for sure. But his followers mimic and echo what he says and
Mhm.
what he does. And so if he operationalizes them on racial terms, then the Obamas will be prominent in the election, and in the voting. I heard some interviews with some of the caucus goers who were proud that the fact that they had caucused for Trump, and the rationales that they offer was he didn't have that his opportunity to make America great again, and they wanted to resume the path that he'd been on while he was in office. There was a great deal of attention on the part of the caucusers to um, the border. I think that race is evident in conversations about the border. Obviously, there's an anti Latino and anti Hispanic element to this, coupled with everything else. It's the definition of white supremacism, right?
Mhm,
It's
mhm.
we are supreme over the people who migrate across our borders, across Black people. We are entitled, and they make the case that they are entitled and they have earned more than anyone else.
My goodness, we have covered so much in such a short period of time, but I thank you very much for being a part of this, program today because, you have enlightened us tremendously, and we're looking forward to having you back again.
Great. Thank you so much, Claudia. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.